Gridiron Fanatics. Glad you could join us for another off-season edition of Gridiron Gab Pro Style, where we gab about all things pro football, from the scoops of the regular season to the scores of the postseason and the picks in the off-season. Let's start gabbing.
The autumn winds move like the thunderous waves of Neptune's sacred palace. And here, amongst the blackened soil, lies the ragged hands, worn, torn, and callous. They await with cunning and vicious prowess, for the warriors have returned.
Come on, Dirk! Don't do it! Woo! No way! Woo! 85! Crying out loud! You're making me, you're driving me nuts!
But behold,
Welcome back, you guys. Glad you could be here with us. Before we get started, I just want to send out our heartfelt condolences to the late Chris Mortensen, who is one of my inspirations for doing my show. He's an inspiration to breaking news, hungry fans like myself and hungry fans like you. We wish his family the best, and we thank you for all your contributions you've made to the NFL over your vast career. Now, as we get started on tonight's show, we're talking about the 7-10 Atlanta Falcons, a football team that has just absolutely been one of the teams that have been talked about since this offseason began. And it all revolves around one player. And you guys know who that is. But before we get started here, let's take a deep look into what made this team 7-10 and why they could not be a playoff team. And I think a lot of reason is, well, let's not even talk about why they couldn't be a playoff team. Let's talk about why they were 7-10. You know, the Atlanta Falcons, for the most part, were a relatively good football team. They're a very good defensive team. I just think, you know, as a guy like Arthur Smith, he had the team defensively ready. But then when you look at this turnover margin, he's supposed to be an offensive-minded coach. And the turnover margin was right there at the bottom. There was only one team that had more turnover, that had a larger turnover margin than they did. Going the other way, that is. And that was the Washington Commanders. The Minnesota Vikings were actually tied with the Vikings with the worst turnover percentage at differential at -12. And you're not going to win. And it's surprising. This tells you a lot about how good the Falcons defense was. And they were such a good football team. They were 12 under the 8 ball, and they were still able to win 7 games. And guys, they've got the personnel. I've said this for a long time. The Atlanta Falcons have been underachieving. They've built this roster very well. Their offensive line is pretty good. They're solid. Their weapons on the outside are, especially their top 2 weapons on the outside, are very good and just been underutilized. And part of that could be because of the guy under center. We're going to dissect this and talk about that player that the Falcons are what we're hearing. The rumblings that we're hearing are already in the works of finalizing this deal, and that player being Justin Fields. And the only thing the Falcons need to be able to do is they need to fill out this roster with receivers. Now, the thing is, the Falcons have a limited amount of a limited amount of space with the cap. Now, it's not a bad situation, but the reality of it is when you have right at $37 million, there is room to work within it, but there's very little wiggle room to get the players that you want. And that's the problem that you run into. You're probably not going to be able to sign a Mike Evans. You may, however, be able to get a guy with the likes of Tyler Boyd, possibly re-sign Cordero Patterson, who's more of a gadget guy. Then there's DJ Shark and a Nelson Aguilar and possibly a Marquise Brown or even bring back Calvin Ridley. So, in a sense, I mean, you can't even rule out Michael Pittman. But the issue that I see with the Atlanta Falcons and bringing these receivers in or possibly looking for a receiver is that you still got to know what this Justin Fields deal is going to look like, because apparently the Falcons are ready to move on from Desmond Ridder. After a trial at this and it just did not materialize, as he was 249 for 388. That's a 64% completion percentage, guys. He threw for 2836, had 12 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and was sacked 31 times. And I think the issue a lot with that is a lot of the sacks that he took. Those sacks look deceiving when you look at the fact that the offensive line was not that bad. Now, I'm not saying that the Falcons can't shore it up a little bit, possibly get a right tackle or possibly get another guard. But sometimes, and I've noticed this with Ridder, he would hold the football. And then when you look at the weapons that they have, I get Cordero Patterson was in and out of the lineup. He was hurt. You had guys like Scotty Miller who never really materialized in this offense. Miller was a big piece when Tom Brady was in Tampa Bay, and he only had 11 grabs last year. And then you look at guys like Mac Hollins, who had a pretty good run in other places. Bijan Robinson had 58 grabs on the season. Jonnu Smith, who is now officially a free agent, had 50. And this is the one that blows my mind. It's Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts. And I'm going to put a lot of this on Arthur Smith. I think ultimately that was a good you needed to get rid of Arthur Smith, because you were not attempting to utilize this guy or game plan for this guy. And I believe within my own self, a lot of this was just knowing that when the contract time came up, we're gonna pay him like a tight end. I said when the Atlanta Falcons drafted Kyle Pitts, it was going to be a waste. And right now he has been wasted away in Atlanta. And I am hoping that the Atlanta Falcons, if they bring in Justin Fields, I'm gonna say this. If they bring him in, I think he can do more with Kyle Pitts this season than he's had done with him in his entire career. Because when he's over in Chicago, Cole Kmet, who's good tight end, but he doesn't have nearly the tools that Kyle Pitts has. And this guy I think he had 80 receptions last year, 70 or 80 catches last year in Chicago. Kyle Pitts is big, he's strong, and he's fast. This has to be a guy you have to feature in this offense. And not to mention Drake London. Drake London's a good, big, physical wide receiver. But Kyle Pitts needs to be the guy in this offense. But I do think the Atlanta Falcons need to push the envelope and push for Tyler Boyd, or possibly push for Hollywood Brown. These are guys that have been number ones, but they're at the phase of their careers that you get a abundance of guys around them. They can do an immense number of things. This offense could be going nuts with a guy like Justin Fields, because you cannot play either one of those guys one-on-one. I mean, my reference is to Drake London and Kyle Pitts. And let's not forget a guy who started out the gates hot last year for the Falcons, and Bijan Robinson, who just barely didn't eclipse 1,000 yards rushing. And I think a lot of that became because everybody was keying on the fact that Desmond Ridder was the weak link. And they were basically saying, hey, we're not going to let this guy beat us. After coming out, and he got hot. And after that, it was just downhill. But then you also got to look at Tyler Algier. He was also splitting carries with Tyler Algier. They almost were identical in carries. So I wouldn't necessarily say, maybe I have to backpedal a little bit on what I just said, because there was a split of carries between Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson. So that could very well be something else that plays. But I think Bijan Robinson's going to get a lot more carries this season than Tyler Algier did last season, because of the type of utility that he brings, the type of skill set he brings to the table. But looking at the Falcons offensively, that is what's going to be interesting. They have to fill this roster out with wide receivers. And as I said, I think ultimately, with the Falcons having like I said, not knowing what draft capital they gave away for, or even what player they gave away. They could have very well traded a player. We don't know that, but as things are set, the Falcons have their 8th pick, which is in the round 1 pick, round 2 the 43rd pick, round 3 the pick 74, and a pick from Jacksonville in the 3rd round, and a pick in the 4th, 5th, and the 6th. So I'm not sure what they gave the Bears to get Justin Fields, but the rumblings are that Justin Fields has officially become an Atlanta Falcon, that just officially become a Falcon, but the rumblings are that the signing is about to take place. Details are being worked out. But if this happened, this would be immense for the Atlanta Falcons. The only thing they would need to do is, as I said, go into free agency and get you at least 2 guys. Now, if that first pick doesn't come off the board, that is huge. Because now, with the Falcons having the 8th pick, the Falcons could very well take Rome Odunze. Or, if they really wanted to, judging by how bad this injury is, if Nate Wiggins hasn't shifted up your board, or if he stays pat because of the possible severity of this injury, I'm undoubtedly taking Nate Wiggins and possibly hoping I can get, if they don't lose their 2nd round pick. This is just thinking out loud. If the Falcons kept their 2nd pick and are able to avoid maybe just giving up a 3rd this year and a 2nd next year, this would be huge, because you could take Nate Wiggins in the 1st round and then you could fast forward all the way down and possibly snag either Keon Coleman out of Florida State. Isaac out of Penn State's an attractive pick because he's an edge guy, and the Falcons do need an edge guy. Or you could very well take Roman Wilson out of Michigan, but I think Germaine Burton presents a unique pick for the Atlanta Falcons because he is such a quick guy and he's got such a knack for getting to the football. Or you could very well go Kyrie Jackson, the corner. Go Darius Robinson, Chop Robinson, Kamari Lassiter, and go back to the 1st round and take a Rome Odunze. You could take that pick. I mean, the thing is, you got to decide which one is more important, because Cooper DeJean could be here if people value Nate Wiggins more and they think that injury is not nearly as bad as it could be. Or you could go Kenyon Mitchell out of Toledo. I'm just not a fan of these 6-foot defenders. I like them to be at least 6'1", 6'2". Especially if you get one that's 6'2". But looking here, you got a ton of DBs and a lot of wide receivers in this draft that are top quality players. And I honestly think, like I said, if the Falcons were able to maintain their 1st and their 2nd round pick, they could go ahead and remake this roster and become a better than 7-10 season, because we haven't even talked about the defense yet. The defense is pretty much going to be left intact from last season. And looking at this defense, you guys, you've got a star player, Jesse Bates, who's just been absolutely just a steal when you look at it. He had 132 total tackles last season, 6 interceptions. When these guys were playing at their best, Jesse Bates was the man. He was just straight up doing his thing. And I think defenses kind of got a handle on that, and they kind of, hey, let's not throw this guy's way. Let's stay away from that. And now Calais Campbell is going to be a free agent. Now you're going to have to replace that. Bud Dupree had 6.5 sacks. Yeah, Caden Ellis, he had 4 sacks. David Anyamati in the defensive tackle, Lorenzo Carter is a guy who I see is taking over that spot where Calais Campbell possibly could be. And they go to a more of a traditional 3-4-4-3 style. Contavious Street, a defensive tackle, had one sack last year. Graham had a sack, so you could put them in Calais Campbell's position. So the Falcons have a lot to chew on, and when it comes to who they want to replace these players with, who they want to replace these outgoing free agents with, because we already know Calais Campbell is a much older player, and you're looking at trying to replace guys like Bud Dupree, Calais Campbell. Kentavious Street is a free agent, so you may have to prioritize signing a few of these guys back. I would say Bud Dupree's one you need to, as well as Kentavious Street. You need to prioritize signing him back. And possibly looking into free agency for a defensive tackle, because the issue with a lot of these linemen are going to be age. You got Leonard Williams, whom the New York Giants are heavily looking at. And then you got Chris Jones, who just coming off another wonderful performance in the Super Bowl in a regular season. Then there's DJ Reader of the Bengals, a guy who's going to get some interesting looks. And Sheldon Rankins is an interesting one, but I don't think the Texans are going to let him walk. And then there's Austin Johnson, who's probably going to get a lot of phone calls, being that the Chargers are well over the salary cap and going to have a lot of trouble maintaining this guy. Sean Robinson could be a guy, because the Giants are strapped for cash as well. They're going to have to re-sign this guy, and I don't think they have it. But the guy that I think everybody's going to be going after is going to be Christian Wilkins. Do I think the Falcons could sign this one? Depends on whether or not they're going to be capable of getting their roster rounded out with the receiving core. Or the Falcons could very well do what a couple of teams have thought about doing. I mean, there's a guy in this draft that is just absolutely there's a guy that I just absolutely love at interior line, and you guys know, if you've been watching the show, you guys know, and that's Byron Murphy, and he also had a phenomenal he had a phenomenal combine. He was great. And honestly, the knock on getting guys in the draft at defensive tackle is at times takes a lot longer than normal to get these guys to materialize. But looking at the Falcons roster as a whole, I think all of this is going to be predicated on what the Falcons gave up to get Justin Fields. I don't know what the details of it are, but as we speak right now, Justin Fields, the details are being worked out, and Justin Fields is going to be an Atlanta Falcon. Now, if that changes, we'll have to come back and do another show. But as of right now, Justin Fields is going to be the new Atlanta Falcons quarterback. Details are not known. This is me throwing ideas out there that the Falcons are going to keep their first and second pick. I would imagine they give up a third and a second next year. Or it could, maybe the Falcons did give up a second this year and a second next year, or a second or third next year. Who knows? Maybe they even gave up a first. All of this is going to be predicated on what they did with this deal with Justin Fields. But I'm a believer that a team that went 7-10 with a turnover margin of -12, that's pretty darn impressive. And no, Arthur Smith doesn't get all the credit, because the defense, he's supposed to be the offensive mind, not a defensive mind. But if they got Justin Fields, this is going to change the landscape of Atlanta, because the reality of it is his improvisation, his ability to do things outside of the pocket and inside of the pocket are going to open up a lot of one-on-ones for Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and let's say they take that money and they go get a guy like a Hollywood Brown, or let's say they don't take a wide receiver and they get the little scatty Xavier Worthy with the new combine record speed, which many people don't expect him to be on the board after the first round after what he ran. But guys, let me know what you think as we get ready to get up out of here. Hit me up on my Instagram at Mr. CeeLo. Also go to the Facebook page of the show of the same name, Gridiron Gab Pro Style, and join the group so you guys can ask questions and let me know what it is you like to hear on Gridiron Gab Pro Style. And last but not least, comment on the show, you guys. Let us know what you're thinking. If there was something that I missed in the show or something you want to challenge me on, please do so. That's what we're here for, to give shout outs. As I said, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. But until the next time, Same Gab channel, same Gab platform.
But behold, there is a warm breeze that comes from the west. The blazing sounds of victory fuel their everlasting quest. It is a call to arms, for they are here. An army that has the will to challenge and the will to dare.